And what a disappointing day yesterday proved to be. In the face of the disturbing and distressing revelations contained in Eddie Betts' book, those who might have been brave enough to step forward driven by their conscience largely failed to do so. I drove home via the local bookshop, picked up Eddie's autobiography, and then read for hours. It's the harrowing 20 pages of chapter 17 that are inescapable. The violation of basic humanity in the name of sport, the toxic masculinity, the cultural insensitivity, the breach of trust, the unsafe workplace, the coercion, intimidation, manipulation, and abuse. Events well known by those charged to investigate over the course of 4 years. What's the saying about the standard you walk past? There was a lot of walking past, eyes down, yesterday. The AFL statement was a miserable failure. It took 28 words to acknowledge the hurt Eddie Betts experienced and 177 words of pathetic self-justification of all the good the league has done. And no one put their name to it. No sorrow, no regret, no commitment to action. The acknowledgement was deliberately narrow, only to the Indigenous players who were subjected to the camp. But as Betts pointed out, it stretches far beyond that group. It's a cop-out to only address the affront to Indigenous culture in these events. Reading between the lines, you'd guess the AFL lives in fear of a class action from the players who were mistreated. Safe Work SA? Well, they stated that it knew the details of Betts' allegations and concluded that no breach of the Work Health and Safety Act had taken place. It's okay, according to the regulators. Presumably, that means it could happen all over again without intervention. It makes you wonder what would have to happen to constitute a breach. I guess in South Australia, they still wear thongs on construction sites. In Adelaide, the great defenders of the footy club that runs the town moved nimbly from their long-held position. It never happened. It never happened. It never happened. Okay, it did happen, but it's time to move on. Mirrors are in short supply across the border because there's not a lot of self-reflection. There's been a protection racket around the events of the 2018 camp to marginalise and silence those who would tell the truth. Resignations were in order, but were neither offered nor demanded. The Crows were lauded for their apology. It's worth spending a moment on what that sounded like. Tim Silvers took on the task as the chief executive. He made no formal statement, but rather walked out and took questions. Here's a snippet of his first, fourth, and sixth answers in sequence. So his first answer was to be sorry to read it. His fourth answer was a vague apology to anyone who ever left the club that didn't have a positive experience. And buried in his sixth answer about moving on and a few things that might have been done better were the only words that actually mattered. Silvers couldn't bring himself to march out in front of the cameras and powerfully and unequivocally apologise. As for the Players Association, they say they didn't know. They might be the only ones. People will disappoint you. But for whatever anger we feel, and mine is raging, we turn to Eddie Betts to lead. And he is ready to forgive. Not for the first time, Betts shows he's a better person than most of us and better than most deserve.
Are you tempted to go bang and whack back?
Oh, you're tempted to do a lot of things, Jared, but that's fine. People are entitled to their view, however misguided. Can I just say a couple of things on
I'd like you to.
If we strip back everything, I think back and I think to myself, what was the actual story in the first place? Why did it matter for the people there? And then the extension of that is, why was it important that it needed to be told? And I think if you read parts of the chapter of Eddie's book, stuff about him climbing into a harness with a rope attached to it and having to crawl to a knife with people yelling abuse at him. Abuse that he says was guided by the fact that personal information he gave to people who ran the camp then gave it to teammates to help use that for abuse. And Eddie says among the really awful things that he said was that I'd be a shit father and I was raised by only a mother. Like, I read that and I get tingles up my spine, and they're not
So
good
is that
tingles.
attributed to one of the people running the camp or one of the players that's been given that information?
Well, the information was given to somebody running the camp who passed it on to the players.
right.
So it was Eddie thought it was confidential.
Yeah, of
and
course.
clearly it wasn't confidential.
So just getting back to my original question,
Yep.
when you read that answers it for me. Why did it need to be told? That's the reason. And I'm so proud of Eddie, Jared, and whoever else comes out there that this bloke had the courage to write what he's written. Because he could have easily, as the great that he is, says, you know what, I don't want to be remembered for this sort of stuff. I'm just going to admit it, and the people that know me can know it. But he's decided to show a great deal of courage and leadership. And, we can get to the statements by the PA and the AFL later if you want. I think that they're...
But clearly those voices that we just heard, and there were some big names included, they think it's isolated to Eddie.
Yeah, that's the point I would have brought up. They seem to be still saying that this is one person.
Yeah.
Are you confident that there'll be other players come out and verify exactly what's happened as well?
Well, we'll see, won't we? I mean, I don't think anyone in their right mind, Jared, would read what Eddie Betts has written and question it, to be honest. I'll just leave it at that. Paddy, you see yourself as a leader of the game and not just a great player. You're president of the Players Association, but also you're close friends with Eddie Betts and Josh Jenkins. What were your feelings when you read Eddie's book?
Well, I haven't read it all, Sam, but I'm certainly aware of what you're going to talk about and ask about. Yeah, it was. It's really concerning, and I know Ed had known him for a really long period of time, but I've never really sat down and gone through blow by blow his experience at the camp. It was more at different stages. It's been, you're okay. Can I help with anything? But certainly, reading some of what went on was, it's sickening, really.
And the statement from I don't think you were president at the time. How long have you been president for?
Too long, but go on. No, I wasn't. 2018.
Okay, so it might have been just before your time. But the statement from Paul Marsh tonight, which you'd be aware of, basically states that all the information in Eddie's book is new, and we now think that players were sworn to secrecy and we couldn't have investigated at the time, but we will now. That to me doesn't wash. Anyone from that time, you included probably, would know that most of what is written in Eddie's book was going around like wildfire for people that wanted to know. Did the Adelaide players deserve better leadership from the Players Union at the time?
Look, we've gone off the information that we were given at the time. And quite clearly, it's difficult to articulate that, I think, for the players that were there at the time when they're still playing for Adelaide. So we, as much as we could and as best we could, got the information that was relevant. Had we known all the information from the outset, I think clearly a more immediate reaction would have taken place. But that wasn't the case. And, we're always referencing things that happen with players at different stages. How can we do these things better? How can we better support players? And quite clearly, there's lessons out of this that we can look to improve what we've done. But I don't necessarily agree with the fact that we didn't do anything. I think we exhausted a lot of our resources around how we could support the players. But at the same time, you need that open, free-flowing communication between two, and that was a challenge.
So last one from me on this. What can we go away from this saying that we have actually learnt and that we have actioned? Because I reckon when we were talking about the Essendon supplement saga, as we came out of it, we all said to ourselves, this is never going to happen again. We're never going to let people that don't need to be in our club in to have too much control to then lose control. But it happened again. So what have we actually learnt from this that players can rest assured now to feel safe inside a footy club?
I think if you look at it from the club's perspective, the club's put its hand up and said they got it wrong, and they've continued to pay the price for that. So I think quite clear the most important thing is acknowledging it, and that's what Adelaide has done. How can we ensure that it doesn't happen again? It's constantly reviewing the processes that we as a PA, the AFL and clubs have in place to safeguard, that of the players. Is it perfect? No, it's not. And there will be different circumstances and issues that arise from time to time. But it's a timely reminder for us all, that's for sure.
Hey, Paddy, AFL clubs are big organisations, powerful organisations here in Australia. Do you think an individual, a player, do you think they're confident they can pick up the phone and call the PA and be able to speak about something at a footy club, or do you think there's just the power of the club is bigger than the individual?
It's really challenging at times, Richard, because we and I don't have all the information, so I'll be really clear on that. But I do know for a fact that we certainly pressed the issue with a number of players and were told that there was nothing in it. Now, at the time, I'm assuming it's let's move on from this rather than focus on it and acknowledge it from a player's perspective. But not everyone feels, that way. So I think there's still some area of improvement around that. And quite clearly, this is a learning from that.
How much of what we heard and has been revealed and read was a surprise or news to you guys at the Players Association?
Yeah, certainly some of it. I guess if I go back to the start of this, we first became aware that there may be an issue in Adelaide around this camp from media, and off the back of that, we started contacting players to see what if there was anything to this. And certainly the initial feedback we were getting from players was there was nothing to it. In fact, a number of players had a view that it was a really good camp. But as it continued on, and for some time it continued on, and then we started to get bits of information. And so some of it we'd heard before, either through media, which, this isn't designed to have a crack at the media. You can't always rely upon that information. But getting it direct from the players was particularly challenging. So some of the really disturbing stuff that Eddie's had in his book, I'd certainly never heard before. The stuff around his, the meeting that he'd had with I don't even know if it was a psychologist or someone else, and unpacking some really personal issues, and then using that, misusing that, and that was the intent of getting it in the first place, was news to me, and I think that's the most disturbing part of it. But even some of the other details around the camp, I certainly wasn't aware of. So it's concerning, I think, and we want to get to the bottom of if other players have had similar experiences.
It's not a witch hunt, but I'm just trying to work out. So in the interim, there was enough noise around this with, about Eddie in particular. So was there not an opportunity in the interim to sit down with him and he's written a book about this, so this book would have been 12 months in the making. Should it not have been a priority for you guys before reading about it yesterday?
Well, I said before, we spoke to a number of players, and I don't want to get into the content of conversations because that's I've talked about this before. Like we talk to our players, our members. I think we have an obligation around confidentiality. But I certainly spoke to Eddie at the time. I've spoken to him, other times, including as recently as yesterday. So it's not that we haven't had conversations. And I'm certainly not saying that we didn't know there was a level of angst about this. But some of the details, and there are lines with these types of things, and I think reading about, particularly the points I just made, that's for me where it's just been such a clear crossing of the line.
Well, it's all out there now. I mean, Eddie's gone into great detail, Paul. Were you satisfied at the time when the AFL did their investigation, their integrity investigation? Were you happy with their findings?
Well, it's linked to what I've just said, Tim, in that, whilst we tried, and look, I'm open to a view from some maybe that we could have tried harder, so I'm not certainly saying that everything that could have been done was done, but I think we certainly tried to get to the bottom of what happened with the players, and I don't feel as though we did. So, when you then play that forward to an investigation, when you don't actually know what happened, it's very difficult to then know whether you're satisfied with that. So, part of what we want to do now is, and I will say that, players were, I think, silent on this issue for fear reasons. I think some players had good experiences, so we understand some of the reasons why that happened, but it's made this issue quite a difficult one. And maybe with Eddie now having spoken about it, it might empower other players to want to speak about it. And I think that's our role, is to see whether players now do want to talk about their experience.
Shouldn't that be the refuge, though, for players with any issues they got in the game? Shouldn't your organisation, the Players Association, have that relationship with this playing group that is so strong and so supportive, and that they know that they've got your back every single time, that they should be comfortable enough to be able to go to you and talk in the manner that they have, or Eddie has in recent times?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question, and it's certainly a question that we've been asking ourselves. I think it's not the first time we've seen a group of players, go through something where they've kept the information in-house. I think you ask yourself why that is. I think players love their clubs, they love their teammates, and speaking out against the club is almost akin to speaking out against your family. And so there's that. There's also a sort of a real buy-in to a team mentality. And I think the way this particular camp was sold in was, this is going to help us, with the extra 1-2% that may mean the difference between winning and losing the premiership. And there was an element of, we don't want anyone knowing about this. And that was drummed into the players. And I think Eddie made that pretty clear, that they weren't to talk about it. So, that included to us, clearly. But, we continue to strive down that path. And there's lots of issues where players come to us and we work through the issues with the industry. But, on this occasion, they didn't.
Paul, just on Paul Marsh, AFLPA CEO. Paul, going to the heart of sort of the lack of understanding of cultural differences with some of the Indigenous players too, which has been highlighted in what Eddie has written about, is there a lot more that needs to be done in this area of our game?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're continually improving, but there's still more to do. And I think Eddie on 360 last night did speak to the progress that's being made, and he also probably expressed that maybe it's not moving quick enough. But when you start running these types of things, you have to do your due diligence, and you have to make sure that if you're going to run a cultural appropriation session, or whatever it might be, a cultural awareness session, that you're actually doing it properly. You've done your homework on the players that are involved, and it doesn't appear as though that's happened here. So I don't think, on that front, I'm sure the intent was right, but the execution wasn't, and it obviously impacted the Indigenous players in particular.
Should the AFL apologise to Eddie Betts and the players, as Eddie's asked them to do?
Yeah, I think, as he said, if that's what Eddie feels is needed, and clearly he does, then I don't think it's a very hard thing to do. I think the industry's through this, and specifically the Adelaide Football Club, has let down not just Eddie. I think there are potentially other players here, and that's something that there's certainly been action taken off the back of it. But if an apology is what's needed, then absolutely, it's not that hard.
And so WorkSafe, I keep saying WorkSafe South Australia, it's Safe Work South Australia and the AFL have both said that they've no intention of reopening the case, for want of a better term, but the indications are that the Players Association, now want to revisit it and speak to all the players on the camp. A, is that right? And B, what do you hope to achieve from it?
Yeah, I think, it's been, the messaging around this has been, we're going to investigate. I think we're not an investigative body, but what we will do is contact players. I think this has potentially raised issues around wellbeing that I think it's important that we check in with the players. But also, as I've said before, players may feel empowered. So if we get some information here that we haven't had previously, then it absolutely, is likely to lead to a conversation with the AFL and potentially Safe Work SA. So, it's, I just think off the back of what we now know, it's our duty now to actually see, how deep is this and what's happened. And I think, one of the things that and I don't know exactly the numbers here, but the camp was split up into small groups, and I don't think every player was involved in this particular part of the camp that Eddie talks about. So it may be that there's a small group, it may be that it's a broader group, and I think that's the conversation we're looking to have.
Did you speak to Eddie yesterday?
Yeah, I did, and I like to think I've got a good relationship with Eddie, and there's been a lot of issues that we've dealt with over the years, unfortunately. But you know, we had a chat about it. I mean, I don't necessarily want to get into sharing, you know, the details of the chat, but, you know, I was just checking in and having a general chat about the issue.